Hello and welcome to the IBM Internet of Things. Today's topic, introducing the IBM Maximo Oil and Gas or Health, Safety and Environment Manager solution. Today's topic will be specific around the incident management functionality, and I'm your host, Darren Quisnesia. The purpose of this video and subsequent videos and the included data set is twofold. One, to provide our technical experts, sales individuals, business partners, support people, and our customers with a data set that is the enrichment of Max demo data as it relates to process safety and the oil and gas industry. Secondly, the purpose of these videos is to help you understand specific functionality in the solution. For salespeople, it may help you with articulating value. For customers, it may help you solve a business problem. In order to keep the videos to a reasonable length of time, we have focused on a couple key product functions and a limited set of use cases. These videos do not replace spending time with the product or getting qualified Maximo training to fully understand all the capabilities of the solution. We sincerely hope these videos are of value to you. As I log into Maximo as Wilson, and you'll want to remember those user IDs, you'll instantly notice a key difference between what you'd expect to see in Max Demo and what's included in this data set. And that is the fact that now you're seeing health and safety, process safety, and oil and gas related data on the dashboards. The first dashboard you see is an incident and near miss analytical screen. Again, sample data gives you an idea of what's possible and the potentials that are out there. In this example, we see my incidents. That's really the primary focus. And I can see incident by type. So by quickly and easily hovering over my key piece of pie here, I see that a good majority of the incidents that occur in my environment are injury related. So maybe that's an area that I want to focus on and trying to make improvement. Another metric or key indicator that I'm getting is also incidents by location. So maybe I want to look at the number of incidents by location and incident type, because maybe that's a demographic that'll help me be able to reduce the number of incidents that are occurring. You'll also notice there is a health and safety app user. So this is more hands-on than the analytics would be. Analytics is more dashboardy. This is more hands-on. So this could be an individual's dashboard at an administrative level, being able to update the action tracking library, being able to pre-build risk assessments, the control of permit to work, those type of functions. And then I see more operational or process related dashboards, so I can see corrective actions that need to be completed as a result of an incident. So for every incident that occurred, there are probably some corrective actions. I want to know who's responsible, what the ownership is, what status they're in, so that I can continue to monitor progression of that information. And if I even want to go more granular, I could indicate by an individual. So I'm seeing Wilson, this would be Wilson, his outstanding actions as they relate to situations that might have arisen in this environment. Things like reviewing maintenance procedures, or updating the chemical registry, or rewriting the hard hat policy. Those type of things are more closer related to what Wilson's looking at in a day-to-day function. I also see a start center for a permit controller. Permit controller, again, imagine a plant environment where you've got a control room where people come request permits. The individual that's in charge of that room can see what permits are outstanding. So at the end of the day or end of the week, they can make sure all permits are turned in and completed. I can also see what kind of permits are being pulled by type. So I've got a lot of confined space entry work happening. Maybe there's a shutdown going on. And I can also see my permits by status. So if I need to start approving some of these permits, I can go look which ones are in the draft status and address those accordingly. Again, just understand the power and capability that comes with the dashboards is definitely something that should be explained and stressed with the end users and customers that you're showing it to. But it really helps now that there is actually data relevant to what we're trying to show, and that's the oil and gas and health and safety solution. Today's topic, and again, being cognizant of time, is really focused around the incident component of Maximo. So there is a new section in the go-to menu called Safety and Quality Management. And within the Safety and Quality Management, you can see a number of applications as they relate to incident, defect, and investigation. And those will be the three applications that we'll talk about today. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on defect because there is incident and defect are quite synonymous with what they can drive to and what the type of data that you enter. It really becomes more of a subject of business process for the customer that you're talking to. If they want to treat defects as a separate function, they would give individuals access to the defect application. They'd educate them on what a defect is. They'd be able to record defects into that application. We do have customers that just use the incident application and defects get reported in there. So they get classified as a type of defect. The pertinent information is captured and then managed the same way. It really becomes a question of business process. Do you want to manage it different through workflow? Do you have different reaction to a defect rather than incident? That type of functionality. So I will bring up one defect in the system here just so you can see what they look like. Bring up the defect. So we have some moisture content in sales gas. So if I bring up the details on that, someone has identified, it looks like Kurt Baldwin has identified in plant A, they must have did some testing, and there is sales gas moisture content. Permissible limit has been exceeded. It's an operational defect. Again, all domains are accessible by customers. These can be manipulated and modified as required, but you can see some of the details that are in there. If you want to classify the type of incident, that can be classified as well. So we'll maybe say that this is operational, actually probably better even calling it a process issue. Reference numbers, sites, priorities, that type of information can be captured as well. If it affects multiple assets or locations, that information can be identified. And then as you look across the top, and I'm not going to necessarily bring each of these up, you can see some of the information you can capture relative to the defect. So was there a solution generated as a result of the defect? Are there any log entries as it relates? Was it external? And I can see it on a map. And non-conformance information is really the unique part of defect. So I can actually categorize what type of non-conformance it is. So is it quality non-conformance? I can give some details on what that non-conformance consisted of, and that information can be captured. Now keep that in mind as we go back to the main page and we look at incidents. So, and it'll become evident right away that you can understand how defects could be recorded through this same application. And again, just as long as they're categorized correctly as a defect rather than a type of incident, you can manage them correctly. So in this data set, I've got a fair number of incidents now in the database, information that wouldn't have been available in Max demo data. This is information that we've now added, giving you a number of different use cases. Some to facilitate KPIs, but some definitely to facilitate use cases that you can, again, train from, show customers, or customers can learn from themselves. So I'm going to talk about two of these in some detail. The first one I'm going to talk about is this Nearmiss Fall. We see it was a near miss, incident category right away. We see its type of injury. You can instantly get visibility into the fact that we've got all kinds of different incident types and we've got all kinds of different incident categories as we define this information. If I toggle through, there's hand slips, there's load dropped, there's hard hats missing, there's welding without permits. So all kinds of observations, violations, environmental, personal injury. You've got that ability to capture all incident types in Maximo. And that's where even a defect would come in. So I'll just tab through one more time, just show you another. Again, if you're using this data set, you've got full capability to go look through these, add and enrich data as required, and be able to define your own use case if pertinent. So the first one I'm going to bring up here is 1185. It's a Nearmiss Fall. So, in our minds instantly we've got ideas on what we would probably want to capture as it relates to a near-miss fall. So I've categorized this incident type as an injury. The incident category itself is near-miss. Again, these are all domain-driven, completely user-definable. This is just the demo data that we have loaded in. So it was a near-miss situation. If it happened external to my environment, I could identify a service address and actually have that show up on a map using mapping services. In this instance, it happened at a local facility, so I'm not gonna identify service address, I'm just gonna put in location details. We see it was reported by Wilson, and Wilson was actually the person affected, and they reported to Jones, probably Wilson's manager. Put in some basic information on the incident details, so it was a near miss fall. What I'm able to extrapolate from this description is it looks like someone was doing a crane inspection, so it looks like there was a regulatory inspection going on. During that inspection, there was a near miss fall. In a little more detail, it tells us that John was working on overhead crane, doing an inspection, and when he stepped back, he almost fell through the door opening. So that information has been captured. I'm not going to go through every field. If you want to educate yourself on what every field does on the screen, you're more than welcome to. Things like reportable, just from a knowledge perspective, if you hit Alt F1 on any field, it tells you what the field is defined for and the capabilities that exist behind that field. So that information could be valuable as well. A couple other things I've identified right away that there is an investigation required. We just realized that there's OSHA implications to this event, so we want that information taken. What kind of actions were taken immediately? So just those immediate corrective actions can be identified right on the main page. So there was a warning issued, and we erected barriers around opening. So that initial action has been captured so that we have traceability on what was done with this event. We see the asset that was affected. It was an overhead crane. It was in the boiler location. There were not multiple people impacted. At this point, there are not attachments. We'll come back and talk about that. And you can see how we can start bringing some of our risk and consequence information in. This may happen at the time of reporting, and it may mature over the life cycle of this event. So because I've matured the data in this data set, I have identified a hazard, so slips and trips. And I just want to make a relationship between the hazard and this particular event so that I've got that relationship. There is also a risk assessment on overhead crane inspection work. I'm guessing that that was actually a symptom of this event, so probably one of the corrective actions was to update our risk assessment, and I wanted to make, again, a relationship between the two. We'll talk a little bit more about those as well. Potential consequences, so a fatality was definitely a possibility if that person would have fell through. And the actual consequence was a slight injury. If it affected multiple assets and locations, that could be defined, and any type of date criteria is captured down in the date section, really for driving KPIs and escalations on response and updates, and making sure this thing doesn't just sit in the queue and actually gets processed. So I'm going to scroll back up to the top. You can see there's a fair bit of information that can be captured on this main screen. Most people probably listening to this recording understand the concept of the app designer and the fact that fields can be moved, information can be removed. If you determine that there's too much information for a basic incident, you could clone it, call it a basic incident screen, remove a great deal of information from the screen. We really just want to provide as much information as we can out of the box and then give you that flexibility to throttle it back as required. So once the main content of the incident is recorded, we can kind of follow through the tabs here. So sequence of events is an interesting new area that's been added where the steps and the sequencing that occurred that led up to this event can actually be documented. So at 10:19, John was performing inspection. After entering crane, forgot to close. At 10:22, after setting down tools. So again, if I was to expand these, we'd see more details on exactly what happened. So that information used to kind of be captured through the log. Sequence of events just gives you a more consistent place for sequencing those events, and really will facilitate the investigation process if this warrants an investigation. If I go look at the activities are time-based activities that happen as a result of this incident. So we mentioned that on the immediate corrective actions there was erecting of barriers around the opening. We just want to identify who did that, how much time was spent. If you're looking for true cost incident, recording the activities as they relate, start giving you a better indication of that information. If I go look at the solution details, again, this is really a consequence of this event. This information probably wouldn't be available. There are scenarios where it would have been available, so maybe you've already done a solution on working on overhead cranes, and there was a miss. Someone missed that information, so you want to again relate it to the event. In this scenario, the incident happened as part of our due diligence and our follow-up corrective actions. We wanted to put a solution out there to let people know what the symptoms, what the cause, and what the resolution of events like this are. And the whole concept of the solution library, or the FAQs, is to socialize this information throughout your organization so that anyone could really, do a quick search, a look up on cranes, and kind of find information as it relates to cranes, stuff they should be aware of. So the last thing I'm going to mention before I'll bring up another example of a different incident is the related records field. So all we really know about this particular event is the event itself, the incident 1185. But we sort of don't know where it came from and what it resulted in. And that information is actually available in Maximo. So if I go look at the related record field, it kind of gives me that chronology or the life cycle of this particular event. So I do see right away that this incident isn't the originating event. This isn't, someone didn't come in here and hit the new button and create the incident right from this screen. It actually originated, the originator was a work order. So the class of record was a work order. It was actually work order 1252. So someone was doing, and I kind of alluded to this earlier, an overhead crane inspection. So it was a regulatory inspection. If I was to go to the work order, I would be able to see that, yeah, it was a regulatory inspection. I could kind of see the plan detail on the steps and procedures that they were doing. So they were tagging, checking control devices, brake travel, hook inspection. So yeah, it was definitely a regulatory inspection. And I know it's regulatory because if I go to the regulations tab, yeah, it was based on this ANSI ASME B30 Part 14 crane inspection. So it's a regulatory inspection that I'm mandated to do. And that's why that individual is up working on that crane. So again, all this data can help facilitate the investigation process. It can give you more insight into what the individual knew before they started the event, because it'll obviously help facilitate the corrective actions that we take. I might even look here at control of work and look at, okay, there was a permit that was pulled, and as part of the preparation activities, actually work detail, I want to see if there was any kind of risk assessment done, but it doesn't look on this particular record like there was a risk assessment done. So all that is definitely insight that will help me as I kind of go through the life cycle of this event. The other thing that I learned right away as I look at this is it didn't just end here. The incident was created, but it looks like there was a follow-up investigation. So, based on OSHA, there was no OSHA investigation because there was a near slip. So I could actually go to the investigation and kind of find out what we figured out from there. So if I look at the analysis tab, and again, I'll explain this a little bit more, there was some things identified. There was key missing records on the GSA. There was a new policy, was missing key components, so someone forgot to identify this is one of the steps on a particular policy. And looks like site-wide or globally, they're going to implement a guarding policy and procedure. Ownership is set, actions are required, and we'd be able to track that information. If you remember on the start centers, we saw outstanding corrective actions, so this would be that type of information. What is out there that still needs to be followed up on, and what is it directly related to? So I'm just going to return back to the incident screen, and I'm going to go back to my list view of incidents, and I'm not going to save anything. And I'm going to tab through, and I'm going to bring up one more incident type here. Anyone that's seen previous videos is probably familiar with this use case. Unit fire, or unit explosion and fire. So this event, the only reason I show it, it's got a little more maturity to it. There's a little bit more detail, and you probably see that right away. So the incident type was an explosion, high potential. The details, so approximately the information has all been filled out here, explaining what exactly happened. The difference in this one is it's been classified. So we classified as a process safety tier 1 major consequence event. There's a description of what that means. And I'll show you as we look through this what classifying the incident does for me. I've also got priority associated with it. It was on production unit 4. I've got a whole number of attachments which I did not have in that other event. So I can see, looks like someone's added information relative to repairing the situation. I can kind of see a unit layout, so I kind of know where things were and where things ended up after the fire. damage. So here's some pictures that someone took during the investigation process. You know, as the attachments get attached at whatever layer of the event, they'll be visible throughout the life cycle. Potential consequence, catastrophic at an operational level. The actual consequence was definitely major loss at an operational level. Our times and dates, our multiple locations. And some other things, again, please kind of look through and click on the different tabs and understand what's out there. There's definitely a possibility when this was recorded that it was a local incident because a fire did occur at one particular facility. But as the investigation process goes on, you might realize there's redundancies at other facilities that are the same as the symptoms that led up to this event. And you might want to make this more of a regional or a worldwide incident and make it visible across your organization. Sequence of events, again, everything is detailed out. Pipe leak, leak accelerated, you know, that information is all captured and detailed in the sequence of events. So that can be detailed out just as we would have saw in that other event. Any activities that are related to this particular event. So looks like, you know, post explosion, there was collection of operational data and eyewitness accounts. So there is, again, time and cost associated with that. There's site containment investigation, so that cleanup and investigation process all needs to be captured and time allocated correctly. I mentioned on the first tab that I classified this event. So I classified it as a major event. Because I went through that classification structure and classified it as process safety tier 1 major consequence event, now there are more attributes I need to fill out. So I want to know which agency is going to be handling this. Were there fatalities? Was there a substance release? And all this could be information that could impact, for example, workflow. So the way your internal business processes and the way you respond. If fatality was checked as a yes, maybe that automatically initiates more activities and more people that need to be notified and more subsequent follow-up that needs to be done. So it really is dependent on your business process, but that's a nice place where classification can be identified. If I was to go and classify this, you can see these structures are completely user definable. And sorry, let me just return back. I went to the classifications. All I wanted to really do was classify it. So let me just, I'm back to where I started. And just give this 1 second. If it doesn't come up, it's the MacBook that this is running on. You can see it spinning its wheels. Sometimes it does that. So we won't really worry too much about that. The idea that I was going to show here is that we could classify it as a different type of incident. The questions, the attributes that need to be populated would be different. And an example that I'm thinking of is if it was personal injury, you know, the questions would be body part information more relevant to that type of scenario. Okay, so I'm going to go back. The other thing that I wanted to identify in this view is the people impacted, so you can identify which people were impacted. You can also identify internal people, what company they belong to, their role, their responsibility, and whether any kind of follow-up needs to be done as it relates to those people. So that's another extra area that's probably worth mentioning. The last thing I want to mention here, and I mentioned it before, was related records. So again, really important to kind of understand the chronology or life cycle of this particular event. So it looks like the incident was the originating record. In our previous example, it was the work order. We see that this didn't come from any work order. It was the explosion happened, the incident was reported in the system, but we do see there are a number of subsequent related or follow-up records. So there was a service request put into maintenance to come and actually isolate the area. So there was, scheduling, time associated with that. That was all identified and created. And there was definitely an investigation. So someone went through the full investigation process to make sure that the OSHA-related information was captured and the investigation was done properly. So if I was to go to the investigation application, I can get some more details on what exactly happened. So with the investigation itself, we can kind of see, a map view of where this particular event occurred. And again, it's using public mapping services, so like a Google map or a Bing map. If you want, okay, it looks like this user doesn't have the ability to look at that, but again, that information will be accessible. If you've got internal, like an Esri GIS, you could also relate that information. So if I look at the details of the investigation, it just copies a lot of the information that was defined at the incident level. So I can see a lot of that data has been captured over. I go look at the sequence of events as it relates to investigation. That information is copied over as well. Any activities, again, activities as they relate would be captured and related as well. The key area that I want to get to, one of the areas I didn't mention on the previous, was any logging. So during the incident, there were a couple entries created. So there was operator log entries, notes, and details. Company contact list was attached. As it escalated to the investigation, someone went through operator rounds and DCS capture for analytical purposes. That information was captured and added to the work logs. If you're using email for correspondence, those email communications would be captured as part of this record as well. So someone attached witness accounts, that's been attached as an attachment, that would come over as part of the communication logging information. I'm going to mention failure reporting. It doesn't really fit really well in this scenario to a certain degree, but it's definitely an area, if pertinent, should be mentioned to, again, customers. And again, if you are a customer, you should be aware of this functionality. So typically, and you even saw in the previous example, I went to the analysis tab, and that's where I did my analysis on why this event occurred. Sometimes failure, or the event occurs due to failure, due to mechanical failure. So what Maximo comes preloaded with is the ISO 14224 failure code structure, much more enriched and mature than the standard failure codes that Maximo uses. And in this example, to really understand the event, it was actually a corrosion issue. It was pipe degradation that caused thickness issues, and that was why this fire and explosion happened. So I was able to classify this as carbon steel piping issues. It was a mechanical failure due to corrosion. Again, all these subcodes and main codes are all ISO based. So now I've said it's pipe supports, corrosion. The failure categories are all ISO defined. So this is a systemic issue, dangerous detected. It was detected during an inspection, or maybe it was missed during an inspection. It impacts our safety climate, and it's an assurance activity. So all this information can be defined. You even see the information in the problem cause remedy is much more mature as it relates to the ISO standards. So information that, again, is potentially pertinent to this event. Where I'm going to go, though, is into the analysis tab, where I'm really trying to detail and do my CSI work to figure out why this happened, where were the misses, and how can we prevent this in the future. So at least we've got that failure detail as it relates to the mechanical deficiencies, but we want to look at more from an analytical level. After action review really identifies, I always think of this as a boardroom, bunch of people gathering around the information and trying to determine root cause. So who's our after action leader, who's the facilitator, kind of our mantra, what should have happened, what actually happened, where were the differences, were we able to determine and draw down to lessons learned that we can share at a social level, who are the attendees in the meeting, and then where I really start to put pen to paper is on the analytical side of things. So we've got three methodologies that can be translated into Maximo. You see them across the top there: root cause failure analysis, cause analysis, like a 5 whys mechanism, and then the failure mode cause and effect type methodology. So the one that I use for this particular event is root cause failure analysis. I did put data in here just so that you can, again, see what it looks like using the different methodologies and articulate that. But as you can see, the examples don't necessarily directly correlate with the type of investigation that we're going through. So this looks more like a valve failure. We were able to using 5 whys to draw it down to root cause was loop route not performed. Using failure mode, cause and effect, I can identify all possible failure modes, And again, this is related to a valve, so not necessarily pertinent to this particular example. It might be, it might not be, but it just gives you that contrast to show, to either learn yourself or show customers. In this event, though, it was really using root cause fail analysis. So I went through, root cause was identified as a mandatory requirement. It was externally required, so we had a third party tell us that this is something we had to do to probably get our plant back up and running. And as we went through all our due diligence, we came to the determination that a secondary cause for this particular event was mitigation devices not operating correctly. So while the fire was happening, we went into our safety modes, and we were determining where we should isolate supply so that we reduce the impact of the event. Some of those mitigation devices and those valves didn't operate correctly. Systemically, we had inspection practices. In this example, there was a policy and procedure in place on inspecting pipe stands, but because of there was the inability to really see some of the corrosion that was forming, that was definitely systemically an issue and led up to the event. But the primary cause was there was actually welded sleeves on the bottom of the pipes, not sanctioned, never identified as a standard practice, but those did exist and occur, so that became our primary cause. We've got cause ownership, and again, from a demo data perspective, Wilson's responsible for all these, whether that's practical or not, that's up to you. And then there are actions required. So this event would probably result in some type of corrective action function happening, and that being associated with the appropriate people. If I'm kind of curious what did happen with this particular event, as I was in other examples, I can see that it originated from the incident. We kind of know that the fire happened, someone recorded an incident. We're now in the investigation process, but I do have a little bit of insight into what happened after it. So I mentioned that a bunch of people were assigned corrective actions as it relates to the root cause that we determined. But in this example, we didn't just start assigning people corrective actions. We actually wanted to go through an MOC process. So we will have another conversation, another video on management of change. But I'm going to guess in this particular example, the MOC was done first, because pipe stands and procedures, there's a lot of changes that need to occur in this particular environment. We'll probably want to do our due diligence around change management before we actually start assigning people corrective actions. So that looks like the life cycle of this event. There was also a related improvement that was created. So inspection accuracy metrics were determined. So we're setting some metrics and KPIs so that we can kind of monitor this to see if the improvements we're making are actually making a difference. The one thing I failed to mention in the previous example, and even when I was in the incident, is I talked about related records and the fact that you could have, you could create a work order, you could create a follow-up action, an MOC like we just saw. Those all come from the action menu here. So when I'm in this investigation, if I want to create a service request, because maybe I'm still investigating and I need someone to come remove rubble so that I can actually get in and collect the data I'm looking for that will help, I could create a service request to maintenance to send in a dump truck and some rakes and some wheelbarrows and kind of clean that area out. Maybe I need to do a secondary investigation. Maybe there is another third party that needs information that's kind of got to be kept separate from the information I'm collecting. That could be done. Obviously, we talked about MOC, work orders, corrective actions. That can all be triggered from this create function. And when you do that, it becomes related records in the database, and you'll be able to see what was done as a result of. So I'm going to go back to the main tab here, and I'm going to go home. I'm not going to save my changes. And I'm just going to reiterate some of the areas that we talked about. So we talked about 3 applications. One was defect, one was incident, and one was investigation. Again, defect and incident, very similar. It's really up to an organization whether they treat them differently, maybe the way they react and their business processes are different. It would make sense in that environment to have 2 separate applications, one for reporting defects, one for reporting incidents. Again, the same thing can be accomplished if you were just to create an incident and then categorize it as type defect. ask the appropriate questions, it would get stored off in its own little area. Maybe you just track defects, and over time you start looking at trends on defects, and maybe that's going to give you indication of potential incidents, and you can get into a defect elimination process. The incident application, we talked about it, the fact that you can record the incident. It can be any type of incident: personal injury, operational, financial, you name it, environmental. You can track that in the Maximo incident application. It's dynamic enough, it provides enough categories, and because the screens can look and feel different and the questions can look and feel different depending on the type of incident, you've got complete flexibility. Once an incident is reported, you've got numerous actions that you can do relative to the incident. Maybe the incident that was reported was a guard missing. So kind of more of an observation. Maybe the end result is a work order for someone to reinstall a guard. Simple as that. But again, in the examples we looked at, they were much more significant. They did require investigations. We drove to investigation. In the fire example, we actually drove to an MOC and a number of corrective actions. So it was a very significant event. It had lots of related records. And then the last thing we talked about was the investigation application. So again, a tool set that lets you go beyond what you would do in the normal incident to actually start investigating why that event occurred. And we talked about root cause failure analysis. We talked about 5 whys or a why type methodology. And we also talked about the failure mode, cause and effect, identifying all possible failure modes and then determining which failure mode led to that particular event. So with that, I'm going to stop today's conversation. Hopefully that will give you enough information to, again, if you're pre-sales, to understand the capabilities, if you're sales, to articulate value of these 3 applications, if you're a customer and you're trying to really understand what you could get out of it, hopefully it gives you enough insight to start understanding what you can potentially do with those 3 applications. I thank you for your time, and stay tuned because there definitely will be more videos coming in the very near future. Thank you.